Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Metro Art Studios. We are so happy that you're here with us for tonight's Art Lab. Today we're working on writing a compelling artist statement or bio, and we have a very illustrious panel with us today. And this one's a little bit different than the ones we've done in the past, where you're actually going to be hands-on working on your own statement and your own bio this time. So we're very excited about kind of adding that as a component. My name is Davila. I am the executive director here at Metro. And if you haven't been here before, welcome. If you have been here before, welcome back. This is a building that consists of 3 floors with 37 studios, a large art gallery, which we're sitting in right now, with our beautiful show up that's right now. And we have a lot of different events. We have this type of event that's professional development for all of you as artists, all of us as artists. And we also do music, we do the art shows, we just have a lot of things going on. So if you're not on our mailing list yet, there's a book in the lobby that we'd love for you to sign to find out more about what's going on. And Erika.
Hello, good evening to everyone. Thank you again so much for being here. I'm Erika Wesley, the Executive Director of the Cultural Alliance of Fairfield County. We are over 600 artists and art institutions and creative businesses. It's a membership organization, so if you are not a member, please see me after. We would love for you to become a part of our community. It's always a joy to be hosting this particular event, so make yourself comfortable, ask questions. I do want to point out the evaluation forms that all of you should have. So at the end, please take about 40 seconds to fill that out and just hand it back to me, or you can leave it on the table, and that just helps us have a good pulse check of how we're doing and how best we can serve you.
Great. So today's topic is really interesting because most of us hate doing this, right? We're visual artists for a reason. We don't like writing. And luckily, we have writers here to help us today understand how best to approach this particular task. And so just as an introduction, as a little bit of a definition of it, the 2 different things that we deal with as artists that we're constantly asked for, both for our own websites, for shows, if you're applying for a grant or a fellowship or something, they almost always say, you need an artist statement, and you need a bio. So the difference between those 2 things is that an artist statement is a piece of writing written in the first person. So you're saying I, me, my, so you're writing it from yourself. That helps your audience understand your work, the influences, the media you work in, the messages that it's telling, and it's used, as I said, for exhibits, grants, fellowships, your websites, and a lot more. A bio is a piece of writing that's written in the third person, so she or he, her or his, that describes you and your work to provide context and forge a memorable connection to your audience. And that's the key part, is like the memorable part. You know, in marketing, we always talk about things that are sticky. You want to be sticky in your audience's mind. So part of writing a really good bio is often trying to think of what's the thing about you that is sticky, that will stick with people so that they know. And I know Erika would love to introduce our panelists. I'm so excited.
Me too. But in the honor of, just giving people voice, I'm actually not going to say your name. This is my new practice, to give people the opportunity and the privilege to introduce themselves. So I'm going to pass the microphone.
Do I say other things or just my name?
Your name, all of it.
Okay. My name is Shanna Melton. I am a poet, a painter, a historical preservationist, and an arts educator. I do a lot of work in classrooms, community organizations, and I want to say, it's hard to narrow it down, but like police stations and community leadership stations. And I've done work with writing organizations. I work with City Lights and Arts for Learning in hot schools. I'm very all over the place. But my core work is teaching, preserving history, teaching history, writing, teaching writing courses, teaching art workshops, and creating my own art, which is painting and poems. There's a lot, so.
Yeah.
Ta-da.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Pakkala, and I have been a resident of Fairfield County for, I think, 25 years now. I raised 2 children here, and I live now in Fairfield after a long stint in Westport. And I am, I would say, primarily a writer of books for children. I have traditionally published 5 books for children, another book in Japan, and I also teach writing. I think I prefer teaching writing to actually writing. It's more fun to work on with other people on their writing than tackle the blank page. And I work with people on their writing at the Westport Writers Workshop, where I've been for the last 11 years. And I also work with art students for a company called Portfolio College Counseling, which is specifically for art students who are looking to apply to fine arts programs. And so that has been an absolute joy to meet these kids from all over the country. And you know, these are such interesting kids doing all kinds of different fine arts. And so it's been so much fun to work with them on crafting their artist statements and their Common App essays. You know, getting them to express themselves in writing can be a bit of a challenge because they are used to expressing themselves in other ways. But we collaborate together. I don't write it for them, even though they wish I would sometimes. Because I really believe in hearing their voices on the page. So that's really where I'm at. I graduated from the Iowa Writers Workshop, which is an MFA program. And I more recently got a second MFA, which seems absolutely decadent and ridiculous, but this one was for writing books for children, because I wanted to understand my craft better. So thank you for having me.
Sure. So to kick things off, where can someone find inspiration for writing a strong artist statement? We know some people may have writer's block. So, and that's real, right? Especially if you're a visual artist or if you have a different kind of discipline, the words don't come easily. So how do you suggest someone find inspiration?
Well, I can tell you where some of the students, the high school students that I've worked with, where they find inspiration, and that sometimes comes from the artists that have influenced them. But in one case that I can think of, a young artist was influenced by her grandmother, and she wrote about her grandmother. You know, in brushstrokes, she wrote about her grandmother in her artist statement, because her grandmother didn't speak English, lived next door to the family, and the two had a very tight bond. And the grandmother's influence on this girl's work, which happened to be you know, working with fabric, her influence from teaching her how to stitch at a very young age to weighing in on her her creations as she got older. This grandmother was an influential source. So I would say near and far is where you might find inspiration.
So for me, it's because I do multiple disciplines, my statement has to vary. Um, so for writing, my statement might be different than my painting. And for workshops, I work with nonviolence and historical preservation. So they'll tie into my art, but I'm there for a different reason. So I am someone who needs multiple statements, depending on where I am. If I have one on my website, right, um, this is what I stand for, this is what I believe, I usually make about a paragraph that's very inclusive of the things that I do and why. And my why is concise. Because when people look at my site and that's the first thing they might see, I want them to understand what I'm here for, what I stand for, what I represent, right? But like, say I was doing this show and I needed an artist statement, I would tap into the work I do with Connecticut Center for Nonviolence. I would talk into having been an educator for 11 and a half years working for the Bridgeport BOE, being an arts educator, what it was like in a concise way to see what happened at Sandy Hook and still work in the school system, why this is important to me. This is not a detailed thing. My name is Shanna Melton. I am an artist who stands for nonviolence based on the 6 principles of Dr. King. I work with the Connecticut Center for Nonviolence. This means something to me because as an educator, I was emotionally, personally, and witnessed the impact that it had on students in my classroom and has on my classrooms today. I would do that for this. But if I'm in the exhibit for the portraits at City Lights, I can't use that. It's not as relevant, but I can say I study the faces of people. I collect features and skin tones and all the details and that come through physically and emotionally from a person. So when I create a face, I'm looking for inner spirit as well as something that reflects who they are physically. And that's why I'm in the show. I don't have a constant statement. I really want people to know my intention. So as a writer and a poet, probably it's different because I always have a need for people to see me with intention, um, not just one way because I'm all over the place, but all over the place in ways that sew into each other. So I just try to pick my work and speak to why I'm there, and it also holds me accountable.
So for those of us who are working on our statements, whether somebody doesn't have one yet, or they're not happy with theirs, or they need to kind of start fresh, what questions do you suggest that people ask themselves in the beginning when they're brainstorming their statements? Like, what questions should we all be asking ourselves when we start that process of writing an artist statement?
I had to write this down so that I wouldn't forget. Now, I'm coming at this from a writer's perspective and from a person who helps students. You're coming at it from many different perspectives, but as an artist. So you have that essential knowledge from the creator's perspective. I ask my students, what are the central questions that drive your work? What are you seeking to answer? What is the thing that is your heart's desire that you want to share with the person who's reading your artist statement? What concerns you? What are the issues that concern you? What excites your curiosity? So I ask those questions. I ask my students to ask those questions and explore, if possible, those answers. Now, again, like as you said, there isn't a whole lot of room to explore in an artist statement. I know I'm getting ahead of myself when I say it's a page, right? It's about 150 to 250 words. So you can't do everything in it, but I think you can get to the essence of what your identity is as an artist. And that I don't think that is a static thing. I think that's a changing thing. But that's where I would hand it over to a real artist.
That's art. It's art. All the art, dance, writing, painting, it's all art. Um, I always say just to ask your why, right? Because, and this goes, like you said, getting ahead of yourself goes into your bio. Ask your why. This is your introduction, right? And so, why am I part of this? Also, this can be an umbrella part of our conversation. I consider myself a legacy artist, right? So, in my absence from this space, in my absence from this body, what do I want people to know about me? What do I want to leave behind? If we looked up Judy Chicago right now, if we looked up Frida Kahlo right now, if we looked up Andy Warhol right now, there's things that they said about their work. That's our reference. We don't always consider ourselves them, right? But we're building our legacy. Our art is what is going to speak for us when we're no longer around, or when we are not around, when it's in our absence. So what do you want people to say, oh, that's interesting about them, right? Knowing that I stand on the side of nonviolence, or knowing that I am a educator and I believe in teaching and, sewing into the next generation of artists, knowing that's something important, that's part of my legacy. If I wrote it, I just wrote this poem about a flower because it's a flower. It's very different from I wrote this flower because I wrote this poem about a flower because my grandmother was a gardener. You see how that changes? Giving it a tie, giving it a little bit of a story that connects to you. That's your why. Something that when you're not in the present, you can't tell them yourself, they can still hold on to and want to have an interest in you later.
I love that. I think that is very important, almost like an anchor, so people can always find their way back to you. And so, Christine, you alluded to the ideal length being 1 page. So that's a good note for all of us. I'm sure if we went over a page, it might be okay. But generally speaking, 1 page. So is there some type of recipe or a secret sauce for people who are approaching their artist statement? What are some of the main components or best practices?
I cheated when I saw that. I cheated when I saw that question because I'm usually coming at artist statements that are already written. And when I saw that question, I thought, oh, interesting. There must be a recipe, and that's an interesting word to use. What are the ingredients that you need? So I looked it up and I found an answer. And then I realized, oh my goodness, all the artist statements that I've been reading do more or less follow this recipe. So I found it from, I, I can tell you guys, it's from saic.edu, which I think that is the Art Institute of Chicago. saic.edu. Yes. Yes, saic.edu/SIT. And right there was that word recipe. And so I thought, okay, this is what my students have been doing. So the recipe is a clear thesis statement. And I think I'm echoing, I think you answered this already, but the what and the why and the how sometimes of your work define the central line of inquiry, which is what I was sort of getting at with all those questions about, what is it that you want to say to your reader? What do you want the person receiving this artist statement to know that you're curious about? Not the static, this is who I am, but this is what I care about. This is what I'm asking about. This is what I'm investigating. So this website gave this example. My body of work combines the how, photography, and the original writing, the what, to investigate the themes of time and memory, the why. So that's an example. And then part 2 of 3 parts, describing the materials that you work with, which as a non-artist, I loved reading this part of my students' essays, the actual material that they use to create, to construct. And I don't know if everyone who reads an artist statement is that particular kind of artist. So I think the more you can drill down into your materials and make those materials real on a sensory level, to the reader, the better. And then, last but not least, the conclusion, which would be to tie together the questions that you ask at the beginning with the materials that you discuss in the body of the answer. So, that's what I say.
I agree. You got that one. I use who, what, when, where, why, and how and everything, like the sequence of things, right? Because who, what, when, where, why are solid. How, even in elementary school, is always the question, right? How, I think, depends on what you're writing. If I'm doing a flyer for an event or a grant or a promotion or a proposal, how turns into also how much, right? But how can also be your process. It can be your materials. It can be, I work in a studio that overlooks the city that I love, and it inspires my work, right? The how is looking into the city, finding inspiration. The how can be technical, brushing the paint. I love the sound of the way the the brush scratches the canvas. And when you put, I'm probably a weirdo, but I'm an artist, so whatever. You put your hand in your bucket of paint and you sort of twirl. And you have the feeling. That's part of my how, right? Or part of my how can be conversations with people in my community that I hold on to and sew into my work. I think for me, artist statements, I look more even at like a half of a page. It's just, I want it to be as concise as possible. It's like big poet energy. It's like the sale, right? Like people might not read everything, but just enough to give them an interest. Whereas in like the bio, that's when you're gonna get all the business. But in the statement, it's like, I just want to collect you first so that you care enough to go deeper. Susan?
So, 10 years ago or so, I was going to apply for residency in Storm King. And I landed up not doing it, but the application was just like such an eye-opener. And it was simply, tell us about your work, 250 words. Tell us about your process, 200 words. Tell us about yourself, 150 words. And tell us something unexpected, 100 words. And it was such an amazing exercise to have to articulate those things. And it's very much what you're talking about, but it just came in this structure where you were limited to how many words. And it's like telling a story. You know, there's a beginning, there's an end, and there's that surprise. And so I just thought it was a really great framework to do, because you could pull parts of it out as you're asking the questions and answering the questions. But unless you're able to write it down, which was like scared the crap out of me to have to do that. But it was a very powerful exercise.
I always say you edit it like you edit a poem. If you've ever edited a poem, you want to get all the thoughts out, right? Every sentence, every word. But then you're like, well, that's a lot of poem. How many words can I scale back, right? So it gets to the point. Okay, now we're going to look at it again. How many more words can I scale back? How many words can say 3 words in one, right? How many words can I do without? This is going to be something people push back on. Oh, well, people with money don't care. They don't care about how you feel and how beautiful. They care mostly, is this going to match my reason for giving, right? Is this going to look good in alignment with my business? They want the points. I do it too. We have this emotion, this is my baby, and I feel like the world will change because it's just my heart is in it. And that's great. But also, if I own this company, how is it going to show up? You want your points, and getting into the heart of things in a statement, you want as quick as you can to show them who you are and what you do. Let your heart go into bios and conversations and videos. Let facts loop them in. Scale it back. Be a poem. You know what I mean? And just get as much information. It's so hard for us to talk about ourselves. I have that issue, right? It's like you don't want to sound braggadocious. Well, I won this award and I won that award. And in conversation, you sound arrogant. In business, they need to know, you won this award, you won that award, you did this. Let it be, and then they can see more as it goes. But make clear who you are and what you do as effectively as possible. Poem the whole situation. It doesn't have to rhyme, but scale it back as much as you can and still getting your point across.
I think that's why it's so useful that artist statements are written in the first person, because you're talking about your feelings and your emotions and all of that. And then the bio being written in the third person, you're talking about yourself as if you were standing next to yourself, so you can brag, right? Because you're saying she won the award. You're not saying I won the award, right?
Therapy in it.
Right.
You
Yeah,
have to be able to say, I won the award.
I know.
I don't know. I don't know if it's what it is, but it is hard.
Yeah.
And we're taught. I was in a meeting with somebody I work with often, and he walked in. He was like, and then we performed here, and then we did this, and then we went here, and then we traveled to Senegal, and then we did this. And I'm like, man, I wish I could. Like, he gets money. He travels. He performs. He brings people from other countries together, and he doesn't hesitate.
Mm-hmm.
We always hesitate. Make sure you're like, and we're taught that it's bragging, but how will people know if we don't say it?
Right.
Right?
Right.
So those are the places where you say it. They came here to know it.
Yeah.
Not the coddle people. You don't like it, win it too.
Yeah.
But that's our chance to make it clear.
Yeah. So when we're talking about the actual wording that we're using in an artist statement, how do you both feel about when an artist uses like art speak? And we all know what that is, right? Like the really obtuse jargon that only specialized insiders understand. Sometimes I find that artists use a lot of that to try to make their statements sound really important, or I feel like that often makes the work really inaccessible. I mean, years ago, I had one of my students, when I said, you really should try not to make your artist statement really inaccessible and use a lot of words that people don't understand. She's like, but I want to, because it shouldn't be accessible to everybody. And I always think about that, but wait. But then the other side of it is, so I'm just talking out loud for a second. When you're a lawyer, there's certain words and certain terms that are only understandable to other lawyers, right? In order to understand law, you have to do some studying. In order to understand medicine, you have to do some studying to understand the jargon and the things that kind of go into it. Is there a place for art speak? A little bit of it, maybe? Like, how do you know when it's too much? How do you know when it's enough? Should you always avoid it? Should your statements be as accessible as possible? Like, how do we feel about that?
I would say avoid jargon, because I think jargon is lazy writing. I think it stands in for better, more active, more vivid use of language. And if you're writing an artist statement or you're writing a bio using jargon, then there's a chance that what you're saying is going to bore your reader. And think about how many artist statements they're going through, how many bios they're reading. So to come across a word that anyone can use, I think is just going to be is going to put them to sleep. I think that there's always a better way than the jargon-laden paragraph. And I used to write profiles of lawyers for alumni magazines, and I would say exactly the same thing. And my editor would say the same thing. We don't need the words that only lawyers understand. We need the words that everyone understands, and that pierces the veil of the mind through the heart. You know, I think the jargon just lands in your brain, but descriptive sensory language goes to the heart. It goes to emotion. So that's it.
That's great.
What's an example of like the jargon?
But we've all been in those openings in like New York City when you're reading the statement next to the wall and you're like, what does this even say? Like, I don't understand what they're trying to say. Yeah.
I'm always curious about the word Renaissance. Like, is that jargon? She's a real Renaissance woman, or, you know, he's in his Renaissance as an artist. I mean, is that jargon word?
I would say it's you know, I think jargon and cliches are kissing cousins, and kissing cousins is a cliche. So, but um, so I think that they coexist. They're similar in that the reader already knows and doesn't have to do any work, doesn't have to do any thinking, doesn't have to do any feeling. And so if you can work around that and get your reader to feel, which I think relates to the stickiness of the bio, you know, so back to my friend whose grandmother taught her to sew when she was very little, and supervised her as she developed with her creating clothing and creating other things with fabric and thread. I would use something like that in a bio. You know, even just a brush stroke of it, I think is more effective because it puts an image in the reader's mind, and it puts the fabric in the reader's hand, and that the visual and the tactile, I think that leaves the reader with a memory, whereas just reading something that's intellectual doesn't leave the reader with a memory, I would argue.
I think my response is close to that. I'm always weird with language. So, like, if you say she was a Renaissance woman, in my mind, Renaissance happens in a time of elevation and a time of change and evolving. So, she's a Renaissance woman. She's part of um, bringing more attention to the issues of pay equity and um, the work of women throughout history, and she's very involved in educating young people about fair pay and inequity for women and women of color. And okay, now she's a Renaissance woman doesn't sound so bad. But if it just says she's a Renaissance woman and that's it, and there's nothing supporting it, then that's annoying. Right? But if jargon to me, language is so strange. So jargon to me, it depends on the context and how it's supported and what you're putting it in. You don't want a whole, she's a Renaissance woman, she's a dynamic, mystical, apple picking butterfly. She's, it doesn't tell me about the work. But if it's like, she's a Renaissance woman, she does this, this, and this is why, then it doesn't feel like jargon. So it's not just, you're not just seeing that and getting no context for it. And something like a statement, it has to be a short response. So choosing your words carefully.
Can I just say that what I found useful is asking friends about your artwork and what they think is different and interesting about your artwork. Because they will have a completely different perspective than you do yourself. And I found that really helpful for my understanding.
Ask friends and ask strangers.
Yes.
People who don't care about you. Yeah. People who don't care about you. Like, because people who care about you want to protect your feelings, right? People who don't know you, like if you're in a show and you're like, oh, what do you think about that piece? And get an honest response. Because then it's not like, oh, sweetie, you're wonderful. It's like, well, I don't know why they did that. You know what I mean? And you're getting an honest feedback, and you can just hold that. Like, it's not personal. Everything's not for everyone. But at least you're getting honest responses that you can then carry over into what you say.
And I also think that that gives you an opportunity to find language that really mirrors you as an individual. So I had to write a statement recently, and I did solicit friends and family because I got stuck at one particular piece. This was for a doctorate program, but I'm trying to describe myself. And so someone I asked actually strung words together in a way that I would have never done so. And it was such a precise way to describe the type of research I want to do in community. And so sometimes people have a way of seeing parts of you that are so intricate that we won't put in a statement. So I think that's the other value add of having other people look at the statement or provide some feedback, because you could potentially be missing out on something that's very key that ultimately resonates with someone else. Which leads me to something that I love, but I'm also terrified of, and that's AI. So I do love ChatGPT, I'll be honest. It's very useful. It's like a little strange, but it's a lot of fun. So if you have not made an account, do so when you get home and just start plugging and playing. What are your thoughts on using ChatGPT? It can generate some cliches, I have found, so you do have to edit. But what do you think about integrating that in the writing process or even the brainstorming process? Shanna's just immediately laughing. I don't know.
Because I know AI is like the thing, but I really, really, I don't want to say I'm scared of it, but it doesn't sit well with me. And I feel like the artist can be, I was in a panel discussion, a different one, and I was asked, so do you feel like your art is important? Do you feel like, how do you feel like the world feels about your art? And I'm like, if I was in other countries, people don't ask that the same. People have such a different regard. People in India, they pray at the statues of poets, right? You look in all these other countries and art is held, but people ask us consistently. I'm sure you've been asked in this room, how important do you think it's important? What do you think the impact of art is? And it's so frustrating. And there's already this lessening of the value of the artist that happens. And I don't personally, Shanna, don't know if it's safe for us to sew into AI. I don't ever want something to speak for me, and I don't speak for myself. I want the ability to do that. I don't want to lose that. Like in the 90s, we knew people's phone numbers, and now all of a sudden it's like, hey, Siri. We all light up, right? And see, and and it's like I don't want to Siri my art. You know what I mean? And so it's not. I know that there's science that is going to benefit, but there's also science that it'll harm. I know that we are humans, and there's ways that it can help things, but there's so much harm that I see, and I don't have the faith that people will protect our humanity if that becomes so normal. And so every time I run a writers group and one of the people started writing using AI to respond to the prompts, and I said, first of all, I don't respond to robots in my writers group. And I was so annoyed, but I was like, also, I might have to if this becomes normal. The authenticity of it, I feel like we should keep pressing, because that's what art is. We're living in a time where it's like algorithms and keep creating, keep doing and catching up. But there's pieces that lasted hundreds of years that took 50 to make. You know what I mean? And the tactile, the hands-on, the being able to speak for our work, it matters to me.
That's a good answer.
I don't know that much about it in my own experience. I've never used it, but I did hear someone give a talk, a woman named Martha Brokenbrough who wrote a book about it for, I think for teens. And she mentioned that all the different ways that it's useful, but she said that AI so far, it could write a Hollywood script, but it could not write an indie script, like one of those quirky, interesting movies that you go in and it does something really different that has never been done before. And I think that really speaks to your point about, that's who we are as artists and writers, that we are aiming to do something that is unique, that's just ours. So I think AI might have some use to you if you wanted to understand maybe the framework of a bio, or if you wanted to understand the framework of an artist statement or some wording. But I think for the really interesting, surprising, sticky draft, you want to do that on your own. And I think anyway, you would, as artists, you would want to have that kind of ownership that you're talking about. You wouldn't want to feel like something did it for you.
Yeah, it is interesting. I use ChatGPT a lot. And I do write too, but I feel a little bit differently in it, that I feel like it helps give you a starting point. Like I would never ever use what pops out of ChatGPT on its own, like the way it comes out. And often you have the option of asking it to generate it again from the same prompt, and you'll get like a totally different thing. I had one of the artists here had asked for help writing an artist statement, and I said, well, let's just type, your basic biographical details into ChatGPT and about your work, and we'll just spit something out. And the first one it gave us some phrases, it gave us some words we hadn't considered that we could use to craft a statement. And then we did it again, and I think when we did it the third time, it went way off base, and it started talking about magical, and it started using like all sorts of things that were so not this person. Yeah, yeah, some of it, but it was just like so woo-woo. Like the first version sounded more sober, more serious, more like his work, and the more times we asked it, the weirder in a bad way it got. But for myself, when I'm using ChatGPT to help me answer a question on a grant application or something, I feel like I use it like a thesaurus is the way I think about it. It's giving me combinations of words or words that are helping me. And I do use a thesaurus when I write, like, okay, there has to be a better word than create. How many times can you use create in the same 3 paragraphs? So it's a tool. It's a tool like any other, and because ChatGPT and all of these AI things are aggregations of human knowledge, it's basically like asking 500 people all at the same time for their opinion about something, and you just get this like spit back at you. So it's not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily good. It's kind of what you do with it, right?
Either way, I
But for a lot of us, like we look at a blank piece of paper and we're like, I think I'm going to go clean a closet, because it just.
Yeah. People think writing is fun. It is violent. Like
Yeah.
it calls up all these things, and you have to face yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's hard, but that's part of the process. I love friends who are smarter than me. I have a couple of them. And my friend Monica, when I was doing my bio, I was like, just take it, and then I'll go with what you said, and then we'll figure it out. Because she has a love for my work, but she has a love for knowledge and clarity. And so I trust her judgment. Because what happens is like, oh, well, maybe I should use magical. If you are a person who's not confident in your writing, and you're trusting in this thing, you're not pushing yourself into it. We have to learn how to talk about our work.
Yeah.
This is part of
We
the
do.
craft.
We do, for sure. how often should you revise your artist statement? Now, sometimes you need an artist statement, like if you're in a show like this, you might need a statement that goes with the particular piece of work. If you're in a different show with a different kind of work, like you were talking about before. Sometimes you have a general artist statement that just talks about your work in general. How often do you suggest that people revisit that? Is it once a year? Is it once every 2 years? Is it when somebody asks you to do it? You know, is there like sort of a timeline that's just kind of a good idea to look at that again and see and make sure that things are still relevant?
I don't know that I have a number, but it seems that if you need an artist statement for some new program that you're applying to, rather than getting out the one you already have, taking that opportunity to revise is probably a good idea. And so I don't really think that there's a number that you could put on it. But I would say, and I'm probably jumping ahead, that when you revise it, it's such a good idea to read aloud and have someone else read it to you, because I have found in my teaching that what you write and what you read to yourself is vastly different than what you say. When you read it aloud, you catch all kinds of things that you maybe could cut out of the piece. Or maybe you find that you're missing a word, and even if you've read it 5 times, you don't see that missing word. So I just wanted to jump ahead and say that.
That's good advice.
I just, say the question again, because I'm processing a lot of things.
Sorry. How often do you advise people to revise or revisit their artist statement?
Because I was thinking, when you were talking about editing, a lot of times we say things people don't have context for, but we put it into the writing. And that's part of editing too, making sure the things have a little bit of context that we say. That's why my head went there. But going back to the question, say it again. Say it again.
How often do you
To edit and
yeah,
see. Okay, so
revising?
revising it is when people ask, and annually. Every year I upgrade my things because I do a lot. So like 2020, since 2020, I've gotten like 3 certifications. I've gotten different workshops. I've done work in larger places. We took over museums for Dr. King Day. So there's things that are relevant now that weren't then. So instead of having to do it every month I just do it every year. But if I have something in March, I might have to add a few things or take it away. But having a foundation is sufficient, so that way you can add things or take things away, depending on what you're doing. My head got really full. Thank you for being patient.
Okay, so I know part of good conversation is good thinking, and I do think you all gave us so much to think about. So we're going to take a little bit of time for you all to start jotting down your own ideas. There's some of you that look excited, others not so much. So no pressure at all. But we do have experts here, so we'll all kind of walk around and make sure that you have support. And if you have questions, it's a good opportunity for you to get those answered. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering if it's possible if we could divide up into small groups and then we could be able to hear what other people are saying and be able to kind of, instead of just going into our own minds right now, use this opportunity while we are all together and we are all artists to hear different people's ideas. I don't know, small groups, little groups, 3 or 4 maximum type.
Okay, how do folks feel about that?
I like it.
Yeah? Okay, so maybe if we just like go down the middle, we can have 4 different groups, if that works. And we'll give ourselves maybe about 15 minutes.
Have a snack, yeah. Keep your strength up.
Yeah, right.
Bathroom that way? Right across that hall?
Just straight across.
Okay.
And then I had some of the artists. Do we have one or two more people who are willing to do it also? You'll do one? Okay. All right. So do you mind going first? No. Okay. Sure. You can absolutely use it. Are we on?
I'm Jay Petro. I approach painting from an explorer's point of view. Initially, a few colors may be chosen as a starting point to investigate the tension and vibrancy between these colors. However, as the painting develops, it slowly reveals my inner world, an emotional state in dealing with my son's autism that ultimately guides the work. I began painting in an abstract expressionist style in order to connect with and express my experience fathering an autistic child. The day-to-day stresses and struggles to be a good father to my son have at times been overwhelming. Love, anger, humor, sadness, and loss became an explosive convergence of vivid color and expressive brushstroke. A subconscious level of interaction with my emotions and my spiritual energy informs me as I connect with my inner world and visualize what's happening on the canvas. I maintain this conversation from within and without throughout the painting process. The entire body of work approximates a place that I inhabit physically and psychologically. My goal in painting is to create on canvas what I am experiencing inside, from high states of agitation and angst to areas of calm. Incorporating vibrant colors and layering textures on the canvas, I strive to reconstruct a path through my emotional world that produces area of high kinetic energy and serenity on the canvas.
Now we're going to put our panel on the spot and ask for feedback.
I thought it was terrific, and this is just an intuitive response that because so much of this is about your son. It's not entirely about your son, but your work as a response, and I love the way you said all of that. But I wonder if you would consider a draft, and it might be a messy draft that you throw away, and this might be scaffolding that you don't end up using. But if you put your son front and center, if you brought him up in the statement, it would be unorthodox, but I would be curious to see what might happen if he, I think you said it's, yeah, he somehow led the piece, and then you then brought yourself in. So it would definitely be something very different, but I'm just curious to see what might happen. You know, like in the doctor's office when they say better, worse, if, you know, better, worse, if you flipped things around. And if you showed your reader what you were experiencing with your son, rather than telling us. But as is, I thought it was terrific.
There we go. Thank you. Is your goal, if I'm assuming there is one, but is your goal to create an understanding of fathering a son with autism, or to create empathy for a child with autism?
I think my goal was to get my experience out on the canvas and have other people experience that. So,
Fathering.
you know, the experience of being around my son, loving him, hating him, being hit by him, caressing him, all those things that go into my life and my relationship with him. So I guess
That's fathering. That's part of it. And so when you had a line, you said something about fathering a son with autism. What was the line that you had about that in your?
began painting in an abstract expressionist style in order to connect with and express my experience fathering an autistic child.
Bring that to the top and then read the next line.
The day-to-day stresses and struggles to be a good father. For my son, have at times been overwhelming. Love, anger, humor, sadness, and loss became an explosive convergence of vivid color and expressive brushstroke. Pretty much
Yeah.
And all those details are emotional and tactile.
Susan, you're willing to share yours?
Yeah, so based on what you said, I'm changing the order. I learned to embroider when I was a little girl. Later came sewing, knitting, crocheting, and weaving. Textile arts taught me to appreciate the finest details, that how the backside looked was as important as the front, that being a perfectionist was a curse. I make things out of found objects, both sculptural and functional. My work is about connections and the partnering of disparate objects. I've always been attracted to the idea that everything has a history. I may not know what it is, but it brings a patina, a fingerprint of its past life to my work table. When the histories of these objects are joined, an unexpected piece of work comes forth. I'm attracted to items well crafted, once essential, and necessary with a particular purpose. My works of art begin with an object that I'm attracted to rather than a fixed idea of something that I want to build. As the pieces come together, they're never altered in any way. A new life is resurrected from a previous one. Importantly, the process requires that all the parts balance as the construction evolves. This drives the flexibility and fluidity of finding just the right part. The great majority of my work is made from wood and metal objects. I sometimes explore options to a point of overload, where making a decision waits for clarity or not at all. When something feels right, it's right, and when it doesn't, it's not.
I noticed powerful verbs in your artist statement. I noticed the verb, I think it was hinged. Some other, was hinged in there?
Partnering.
Or maybe I'm becoming unhinged.
Joined, I used the word joined.
So I felt that there were many powerful images, and especially at the beginning, I felt like you started with these, concrete images and a lot of specificity, and then as the statement went on, the writing became more general, and I paid deep attention to the beginning in a sensory way, and then less, I heard it, but it didn't affect me as much. When it's right, and when it isn't, it isn't. I don't know if, I don't mean to be prescriptive because it's your statement, but I wonder if that's necessary to say, or could that be understood? Just a question.
No, that's fair. It's actually a very visceral experience. It's like I feel it in my stomach.
Oh, see, that's more interesting
Yeah.
to say it that way.
Yeah, it's this, it either is or it isn't.
I feel it in my stomach, it either is or isn't.
Thanks.
I just think it's a lot, but it's beautiful.
It is a lot to do.
It does a lot. And there's ways to still say it and just make it more concise. And I think you have a lot of, you did the part about bringing old things together. What was the sentence? Bringing things together or use things together.
I'm attracted to items well-crafted, once essential and necessary with a particular purpose. Is that what you're thinking?
That's a great line. And then there was, in the beginning, you talked about the materials and how you have, there's things you can pull without having as many words. Like those, and then you say it out loud. When you say it out loud, I could tell there were things you felt more than others. And towards the end, as you read it, it felt like, I don't know if defensive is the right word, but you would have won the argument. You know, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, declarative. That's the word. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not what you want to greet people with. And so, looking at the tactile that you were talking about in the beginning, looking at the emotion that comes from bringing things together, right? The materials that you use, the fact that they're older and have stories. That's what we need to know. So just taking a few, simplifying it a little, and bringing those points to the surface, because it doesn't have to be, you want people warm, you know what I mean? But not to the point that you lose your character, just enough that they stay with you. And towards the end, it felt declarative. I don't like to tell a woman not to be angry, that's so annoying. But it's not that, it's just, what you do is unique and you don't want so much emotion to overtake the very clear, vivid, emotional experiences you have in bringing things together, feeling the materials, looking at older things. That's what I took from it. Is that helpful?
I wrote this a while ago.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been doing, I do legacy boxes for people where I take objects that are important to them and I create a piece of work out of it. And so I'm trying to figure out if that is a word to put in here. That's like a jargon word too, legacy, and how to incorporate, because that's very personal.
What is something personal that you would put in the legacy box? Like, what is the item?
It's something that somebody has given me. So the first group I did, there were her father's engineering tools and her husband's grandfather's architecture tools. And then I did a series in honor of my mom using buttons, crochet hooks, knitting needles, these like floral arrangements. And then recently, somebody gave me a caliper that belonged to his mentor. And so I created a box.
And what does legacy mean for you? Because it's bringing up a lot of emotion. So what does legacy mean for you when you create?
So my mom was an ordinary woman who did extraordinary things. She was an amazing baker and sewer. She crocheted. But her legacy is also my legacy because I do a lot of that stuff. And so I want to share what that feels for me, for other people. So these first boxes I did, she's like, they're just rusty things. We don't know what to do with them. And suddenly now they have 4 boxes for her kids because that's their legacy. This is what their grandparents did. And that's a very powerful thing, that what looks like garbage or trash or that stuff that nobody knows what to do with suddenly is part of your legacy because of how it was used and brought into that.
That's what should be in your statement. I create legacy boxes because my mother has transitioned. And there are things she left behind that matter to me. Someone else might see it as insignificant, but it's part of my story. I offer other people the opportunity to tell the stories of those who came before them. You see how that changes?
Yeah.
That's what made you cry. You know what I'm saying? That is why you show up. So I include things such as buttons, such as doorknobs, such as, what else? Curlers, flowers, rollers. My grandmother had those big pink rollers, right? I include those things. I wish. And I wish I had a purple ashtray. I don't smoke, but it would be great for just aesthetics. But those are the things, right? Last night we were in a group. What was the Things That Don't Suck was the poem that was brought to Things That Don't Suck. And it was things that you'd forget matter to you, like the tricycle, you had the red tricycle. Like, we had to come up with things. And like the little beaded door switch that you pull to turn the lights on in the pantry. I started adding, because we were able to start adding things that don't suck, things that are nostalgic, right? That's what you're drawing up. And that's important, right? So the legacy box, my mother was sacred to me. My mother had a story. These are things that given away or left behind, people would look at as irrelevant. But I look at it as legacy. This is why. This is other people's legacy. That's the soul of the work. That's what people want to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I know. Therapy. We got some therapy in here. I'm not even a Kleenex. So we do want to go over bios, and I know that like this is a lot today. We're trying to tackle a lot of information, but if we could briefly go over, like, now that we've talked about statements, we've heard some statements, we've worked on statements, the bio is a different thing. It's something, you know, as I said, we're working on it in a different voice, and it's the sticky part, it's the memorable thing, it's the hook, if you're talking in marketing speak. How do you come up with that memorable hook? Because as a person, sometimes you don't realize that there's something about you that's memorable, but other people know what they are. I mean, do you start by asking other people, what do you think about me? Or do you start on your own where you're trying to come up with the hook? And if you can't think of a hook, then what do you do? You know, how do you come up with that one memorable thing or more than one memorable thing that kind of gets that bio started and gets it rolling?
I think it has to do with the specific versus the general. And then when you get to the specific, something that no one else can say in that particular combination. And I keep going back to that student because she had such a way of, she didn't think she could write, but as soon as she started to write the story of her Italian grandmother teaching her to sew, suddenly she had all the words she needed. And they weren't fancy words, but they were precise. And they just told the story that only she could tell of her grandmother really relying on I mean, she didn't say all of this in the writing, but she said it to me when we talked. Her grandmother not speaking a word of English, but always this welcoming ritual after school where the sewing lessons continued, along with tea and cookies. And the only communication was the lesson, the sewing lesson. It wasn't a language thing. So that's my kind of long-winded way of saying something short and precise and that can only belong to you. That's what I think makes it sticky. If you're talking about big words or big concepts, then I think you're getting away from sticky.
I feel like the hook is the art. And maybe I have a different experience because maybe it's different for me because I feel like the hook is the art. Like when you're writing, people don't see that immediately. They hear it hopefully, and then they find the words. But if you find me, you're gonna see paintings. Even if you see poetry, the cover of my book is paintings that I did. Like everything is art. So I don't really. I think my hook, if there is one, it even sounds weird to me. But I think my hook, if there is one, is just opening with, you know, why I do what I do. But for me, it goes straight into who I am, where I'm from, and the highlights of what I create. She's a painter, she's a poet, she finds color and tells stories and things like that. But it's really to the point for me.
There aren't a lot of poets who are also visual artists. That's kind of how I think of you, you know?
Yeah, either people know me for one or the other.
Yeah.
So for me, it's important to put them all on the forefront. And also, people who know me for both don't understand how people could know me for one or the other. I think in people's mind, it's like, how does she do both of those things? Or people have even in grants and proposals, they tell me to choose one. Because, like I said, on the business side, they have to be able to speak for, if they're doing a artist grant, they don't really need me to be a poet, right? And so they want me to choose one. So when you see my page, for me, it's important that you see that I'm multidisciplinary. It's my little rebellion. And then I talk about my why and the impact that I want to have. And then that's when I start listing the facts. Mine is very factual and then emotional at the end. I don't, because I just need people to know all the things because they try to box me into one all the time.
Jen, you said something earlier about kind of seeing yourself next to you as you think to do that. And so when you do that, is that an opportunity, if you're able to really separate it out like that as a third person, it's what am I attracted, what is my attraction to this person? You know what their artwork is or something, and I'm just wondering if you are able to kind of separate yourself and, like see yourself across the room, what you're drawn to, that kind of makes it sticky in a way.
Sometimes I think that you get that when you have a conversation with other people. There's an artist here where when I first met her, I was trying to understand her work and why she made what she does and where she came from and what her journey was. And she shared with me that in her professional life before she was an artist, she built helicopters. And that's really unusual. Maybe not around here because Sikorsky is here, but for I don't know anybody else who makes helicopters and is an artist, right? And maybe it starts by just talking to other people and saying, I'm going to tell you about me, you're going to tell me about you, and that kind of naturally comes about where it's like, I didn't realize that, that's really interesting, or, that you scuba dive like day, or, that there's some kind of interesting thing about you that informs your work. It doesn't help maybe if it doesn't inform your work. It's just like some random thing that.
The word that they keep coming back to around this had to do with validation. Is validation. So when you're writing about what you do or your bio, sometimes it just feels like we're trying to validate what we do, that somebody's going to buy into it. And it's not a positive feeling, but we're also trying to sell. So it gets really complicated because, the artist statement is so intimate in a way about what you do, but you're also trying to sell yourself that somebody's going to be engaged. And sometimes that doesn't feel so good.
I always thought that the biography, at least for me, was like a much more serious component of you have the artist statement that's a little more creative and you're talking in the first person, but for my biography, what I did was I actually
actually started from day one. And I wrote down everything, everywhere I've worked, everywhere I've lived, and just really, because that's your story, that's your history, and where you are now is because of all of that. So, it really starts where I was born. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts. Because it invites different people in, depending on all the different things. I grew up in really old houses. My dad was an artist, a crazy artist. My mother was a writer. We had no money. And people that identify with that, just the little parts then you pull out what the interesting things are, but it's like a history. And it's your history. So what makes your history more, spectacular than someone else's? And you'll be able to see it if you write down everything. It's a lot. But it was a good exercise. It was really fun to do. Just even the experiences, travel, like random things, bad things and good things. And then you can really look at it and see what was really pivotal that really was important.
I like that word pivotal. And I think germane is another word. If you're writing a biography and it's all the facts and all serious, that's good. But if you could have something that is both interesting, that sticky quality, and germane to who you are, if I don't know why I'm thinking of, when you're very young, what's your very early experience in becoming an artist? I feel like that would be my, as a reader, my in, if I read that you made pictures in the sand and cried when they were washed away. Or, I don't know, that's one thought.
Yeah, one limitation I'm always coming against on these art websites is they have character or word limitations, like 250, 500, 1,000. And especially it seems to be true on the bios. And I'll write a whole thing in Notepad, copy and paste it in, and you're over. Then I have to go back and figure out how far deep I need to cut.
On my website, I have not a long, but like a decent sized bio. And the first paragraph is my short bio. So I can tell people, like I said, I put the highlights in the top. So if people want a short bio, they can just cut and paste the first paragraph. And then the rest of it is the details, right? And I agree with you. That's where the awards go. That's where the honors go. That's where the publications go. That's where the trips that you took to read or perform or share or exhibit go. That's where some of the journey goes, right? But always have at least your first paragraph, like I said, specific. My name is Shanna Tanika Melton. I'm a poet, painter, art educator, historical preservationist from Bridgeport, Connecticut. Ooh. Then I talk about highlights. I'm an award-winning, it took me a long time to say award-winning poet, award-winning painter. I am a community activist. These are the places that I worked. And then in the body, I go into more detail.
Journal experiment.
Yeah.
Like the lead first, and then everything, so they can just
Cut and paste it.
at the bottom.
Yeah, always make your first paragraph your short bio. So when you run into those things where they have a limited character, you can just drop that right in. And it just makes your life a lot simpler. The other trick that I do, when you want to update your things, say you're booked at, I don't know, the Bruce Museum, right? We always, on Facebook, we always share their post. Save the post, share it from your page, and then you have a file of all the things that you did. So that way when you go to update your resume, you have everything in your photos, as opposed to having, when was I at the Bruce, when was I there? You automatically have it there. So when you go to build it, you already have a file.
So you can start an Instagram and then link to Facebook. You can't link from Facebook to Instagram. But the Instagram is about images, so your paintings are up there, and then you can share onto Facebook, and then it'll make it it public and it'll just go out.
Yeah.
But it's from Instagram to Facebook.
Yeah, and if you go to your photos on Facebook, they have that file. And so even if you share from your page, whatever you do, you'll always have a recording of it, as long as Facebook doesn't screw you over. And then when you go like in your annual update, you'll have a record right there, because it's always hard to remember. You don't remember half the things you did. And that's important. Putting highlights. So this it's discriminate. But, something you did in a small cafe is not as relevant as something you did in a museum you don't want to put, and then I was on the corner of Broad Street and Fairfield Avenue, and then you want put the big things and a couple of the small things. But it's not your CV, right?
Right.
It's your bio. So you want to show that you've done great work in great places and you're community oriented. So you have some small places too. There's a balance. And then now we're talking CV business if they want the corner of Broad Street, the cafe, the Apple Jacks, the having highlights still, but more than in the statement.
This is kind of a question similar to what you were talking about, the person who used to do helicopters, and I know a lot of artists in this room had corporate jobs or something and then went into art to survive. But when you're writing a bio, I've written several and gotten critiqued on several because I did quit my doctor job. I still do art and I still do my doctor job. And so do you think that's a hindrance or a positive to put in a bio? Because in my brain, when things get really crazy, doctor-wise, I have to make something, so it is a connection for me, but then I kind of feel like it takes away from the artist bio, I guess. So my question would be, would that be something you'd keep in or something you would not keep in?
What kind of doctor are you?
Naturopathic medicine, integrative medicine.
Does it engage your art?
As in, is my art about medicine?
Is your art in any way related to the medicine that you practice?
No, I would say my art is my outlet for dealing with patients.
So like with naturopathic, it's organic materials,
Oh, true, yes, yes.
it's
that is true.
massage
Part
and
of it.
healing, it's texture, it's tacticity, it's calming and feeling and emotion.
Yes, root cause medicine, that's true.
Art.
Yeah.
There's an artist, Alex Gray, you should look at, right? And he did textbooks of the body. He did the art where you see this is your guts, this is your brain, this is your brain on drugs. He did all the drawings, and he turned that into spiritual art and creativity. Not necessarily what you have to do, but looking at someone like his bio, who's very structured in science and in art, looking at how naturopathic medicine is very interested in peace and calm and healing and natural organic ways. Art is art therapy, healing, structure, incorporating natural materials. I don't know what your art looks like, but I imagine if you do that, you somehow engage that in another way. Having both sides of science and art means that you probably have a better business acumen in some level. you have to know numbers in science on some level, right? If you're invoicing people, if you're creating business around that, you have to do that for art as well. So they both benefit. What I focus on is 100%. No, would I mention it? Hell yeah. That's part of who you are. And they definitely play into one another.
I agree with that. But I think with the limited real estate of the bio, I totally agree with the suggestion not to take up too much space with it. But especially if you think there's an intersection between the two, that would be an interesting thing to point out. And I wonder, I don't know, I don't know if it's a good thing to emphasize outlet, art as outlet versus art for art's sake.
I agree.
Can you explain what you mean by that exactly?
What do I mean by that?
Yeah, like, I mean.
I was
you're
hoping no one would
making a
ask me a
statement
follow-up
now.
question about that.
You're making a statement that it isn't maybe recommended to express that your artwork is an outlet, is that what you're saying?
My intuition tells me that to emphasize it as a therapy somehow dilutes the value of it. But that's a very personal opinion from a writer's perspective, not as a visual artist perspective.
I agree.
I think that I know sometimes when I write, especially a first draft, it has a cathartic value, but revision never does. And I think when the revision aspect of all art is invisible, like to the viewer, to the reader, but that's where, you know, we separate ourselves from people who are just doing it on the fly. And so when you emphasize art as an outlet, I think somehow it dilutes in some readers' minds the power or the value of it.
Certain words have different effects. Outlet sounds like hobby.
Yeah, yeah.
Hobby, right? It's in that same family. But if you say, it's a way to engage my mental, emotional, spiritual core and express my thoughts and feelings, thereby connecting with my community in ways that, you know, reflect me, something to that effect, that changes outlet. You know what I'm saying? It's the context.
Okay. So I think we're at a good stopping point. We're both really, all four of us are really grateful that you were all here and participating today, and I think we got a lot of really good stuff out of it. On your handouts on the very bottom, there's a Just for Fun link, and it's basically like artist statement Mad Libs. You're not to do it until you actually write your artist statement. But it is just kind of a fun, silly thing that'll give you some giggles at the end. The next Artist Work Lab is the first Wednesday in March. And I cannot for the life of me remember the topic, but Erika knows.
Oh, I don't. I don't, but we'll publish it.
Yeah, we'll let you
soon.
know. We're really great. I know you would like to say something too, but we're so grateful that you were here today. Yeah, and your panel, the panelists were tremendously helpful.
Yes, and thank you for your time. We know we went a little bit over, but thank you so much. Please don't forget to fill out your session evaluation and get home safely. Again, thank you to our panelists. I think this was a great, enriching conversation.